that? Oh, it's the 22nd of October, isn't it? And I'm talking again to Jim McNeill. Jim is going to tell us now about his experiences and about experiences of other Australians that he knows of or knows in the Spanish Civil War. So, where do you want to start, Jim? You told us how you got there, didn't you?
Yes, I think I'll go on to Bill Young.
Right.
I referred to Bill Young previously, and I mentioned that at the end of 2 days he emerged from the cave that he'd made in the coal and went towards a lone trimmer who was occupying the change of shifts, and he croaked out and the chap swung round soon to what was coming, and he said, after Bill had said, "It's all right, mate, I'm only a stowaway, come up for a drink of water," and the bloke said, "Well, we've been praying for stowaway because we're been working deuces, working double shifts." And later on, days after, this bloke, it turned out to have been a real heavy drinker, but also one who had emerged into religious rings and got converted. He'd done that in almost every port he'd come to all over the world. And on this occasion he revealed to Bill, he said, "You know, when you first popped up out of the coal, at first I didn't know whether it was the second coming of Christ or I was still in the DTs." So they became friendly after that. But there was one point I'd left out of the previous description. I thought it was very apt, this bloke saying I didn't know whether it was a second coming of Christ or I was still in the DTs. Well, I've related how Bill went on to Spain. Well, during his stay in Spain, particularly after a retreat when Franco made his first Panzer division and split Spain almost in half, there was a great deal of reorganisation in the rest period, at which there was rifle practice, grenade throwing and so on. Well, Bill was a powerful, built fellow and proved himself a marvellous thrower of the hand grenade. Another one who was still better was a big bloke that was the same physique, but he, not like Bill, he was not just a working class person. He was a member of the aristocracy. He was a nephew of Lady Astor. We used to get letters in the post with Lady Astor's crest on it. And he and Bill became friendly because Bill was a real disciplined soldier and a great thrower of the hand grenade. And they palled up together. And in fact, in August 1938, after the crossing of Ebro, we advanced 20 miles in about 24 hours, and we were held up at a great granite hill encrusted with ironstone. You had to, and would turn the pick even try to dig into it. And it was the depot for all the reinforcements, for all of the munitions and supplies that the fascists needed. And there they held us for, they held us forevermore, as it turned out. But we made valiant attempts to take this hill, and what became known as 481. Was on this hill, 481, that Lewis Clive and Bill Young met a barrage of machine gun fire at one particular time, about the 8th time to attempt to take this hill, and both of them were killed in the same burst of fire.
Excuse me, this Lewis Clive, was he the relation of Lady Astor?
He was a nebula Lady
And
Astor.
did you say he was related to Clive of India too?
No,
I'm not
yes, he was.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, he was a descendant of Clive of India.
Gracious.
He worked he was also a Labour councillor for the borough of St Pancras in London. It was a working class suburb, and he was a Labour councillor for the St Pancras borough.
Was there a tremendous loss of life in this action?
Terrific loss. We went in there about 170 strong, and within 10 days there was only about 60 left.
170.
Yeah.
How would you lost more than well over half?
Yeah, they were not all killed. A lot of them were wounded.
And what unit or division or what?
That was known as the number 2 company of the British battalion.
And the Australians were in the British.
The Australians were mainly in the British. Yeah. At that time, when we crossed the Ebro on the 23rd of July 1938, there were 8 Australians and 2 New Zealanders.
And
that was as many as ever was with the battalion at one particular time.
Yes, okay. And that was when Bill Young was killed. And he was this chap you showed me the photo of the other day. He'd been in the First World War.
Right,
that's right.
Yeah.
I suppose, were there mostly single men who were from Australia?
Bill was a living de facto. But that was one of the provisions. And he had been married and had a son who later enlisted in the first AIF, only a boy at the time.
Is that you then? What about you then? You had you did have uniform. They had a uniform.
Yeah, it was more like what they call the giggle suits. The second AIF were just khaki.
I see. And then what happened then? What were you going to tell me after that?
Well, as I mentioned, Bill and Lewis Clive, descendant of Clive of in India, was both killed in that action.
Was the fire? Were you able to bury your dead? Was the fire?
We were not able to bury either of them because they advanced almost within grenade throwing range, and the fascists beat us back, and they remained out there and not able to get any further.
Now this is an interesting photo. This is in Australians in Spain, which was, I mentioned last week, was by Nettie Palmer and Len Fox, current book distributor, 695 George Street, Sydney. Doesn't give a date. Yes, it does, May 1948. And there's a photo on the frontispiece of Australians and New Zealanders in Spain. Kevin Rebecki. Now, is he in Australia?
He was an Australian from Melbourne, as a matter of fact.
From Melbourne?
I think originally his parents were Polish Jews.
Lloyd Edmonds of Melbourne. Now, I interviewed Lloyd Edmonds in this series on the Depression recently. It's in this series. Then Mern McDonald, New Zealand. Joe Carter, Sydney. In front, from left to right, Jack Franklin, who died in Sydney in 1945. Bert Bryan, New Zealand. And Jim McNeill of Sydney. Well, you were a lot younger then, weren't you?
Yeah. Another one who was much younger. On the way back, that's... No. Yeah, was it? On the ship, coming back.
You missed that one there. No, that's right. There's another one inside, I think we mentioned the other day. Charlie Waters, Charlie Riley, Joe Carter, Jack Franklin, Charlie McElroy and Jim McNeill. Yes. Isn't that Wouldn't that be right? Is that Ron Hutt? That was Ron Hutt. That's not Ron Hutt, is it? No.
Definitely.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah, well now what happened after this defeat? This was the turning point of the war, was it?
That was the turning point, because had we had planes and tanks and guns and sufficient supply, we would have swept the fascists out of their stronghold.
And what was your supplies like? What were you?
At that period, they were petering out. There were 2 or 3 planes came over against myriads of the fascists. They were like bees swarming over all our positions.
Bombing?
Bombing, yes, bombing. For 5 minutes after we crossed the Ebro, for the next 20 miles, for 5 minutes after we crossed it, there was one huge armada of planes bombing hell out of us every yard we went.
And you wouldn't have been dug in? You wouldn't have had trenches?
No.
They were just...
And even when we got to this 481, it was terrifically hard to dig in then. The granite was iron.
And were your supplies, say, food supplies and things good? Or
Food was reasonable.
You weren't hungry. I mean,
No,
you weren't.
you were continually hungry, but never down to the real subsistence level.
So.
I came out of Spain 9 stone in weight from 10 stone and a half.
10 stone and a half. But you'd lost a bit,
Yeah,
not a...
not
a lot.
drastically.
No, I see. And how long were you there? How long were you in Spain?
We were evacuated. It was July, I'm talking of, in August, when Bill Young was killed. 23rd of September 1938, the Spanish delegate to the League of Nations had given a promise that if the Germans and Italians were withdrawn, that they'd withdraw the International Brigade. And despite the fact that the Germans and Italians were still there, they kept that promise. They withdrew us out of the fighting on the 23rd of September 1938.
And so when did you say the Ebro thing was?
July.
Oh, I see.
July, August, September.
And how long were you in action then in Spain? Like from when did you get to Spain again?
September 27.
37. I see you were there for a year.
Yeah.
I see.
14 months actually. Because we never were not evacuated until 2 months after, despite the fact that we were drawn on the 23rd of September. It was the 8th of November before we were evacuated.
And what
They fought on that.
And did people feel after this that the war was over? Did you feel after this Ebro defeat that that...
No, I never thought even at that point of defeat. It was not until after about a few days before we were departed from Spain, we got word that the Republican force had been driven back over the Ebro, which left on the fascists within striking distance of Barcelona. Well, that was a time that I started to feel uneasy that they eventually would be defeated, but because they were not defeated for another 5 months.
Was it all done, the fighting all done by the Spanish armies, or was there guerrilla warfare too? Were they have the sort of guerrilla like they did later on in Europe?
Not so much.
No.
There was pockets of resistance amongst the militants that could not get into the army, that would snipe and sabotage railways and that sort of thing, but not a real organised guerrilla.
There wasn't, for instance, women. I mean, the population as a whole, and women and...
In the early days there was plenty of women in it, but as a method to it, and they found that they were not economic to use women. It was atrocious.
It was terrible war.
Atrocious, yes. It was. They killed each other I mean, you've heard of Capo Delano, haven't you? The radio general. Well, he'd encouraged the Moors, who had Morocco fighting with them, large bodies of Morocco. He'd promised them over the air that when they took a certain town or village, the women were theirs for the wanting.
And they were like they were mercenary sales. They weren't in it for the
No, not for the
principle of the thing.
No. They'd been driven out of Spain, a century before, here to Morocco and different islands. One thing that Franco did promise them that he'd give them independence if he won.
Did he?
No.
What were your other impressions of Spain? What else do you think you did that or of that's worth telling? What about the relationships between the international brigaders and the population, or didn't you come in much in contact with the population?
Not so much in contact, although at every place when you're quartered at a village or a town, the Popular Front would give a civic reception, and there was fraternisation, but language was one of the main difficulties.
I see. And did the other international brigades were the Americans in the British, or did they have their own?
No, they had their own. The Americans had 3,000 and the British 2,000.
And would you know overall how many people we had in Spain?
30,000.
No, Australians.
Oh, Australian, 54.
54.
That's including 8 women. Nurses.
That was a nurse.
Yes.
I see. And I suppose, really, we'd be one of the most far off, wouldn't we? I mean,
we were most distant, yeah. It was not until 1938 that even it started to seep through to any degree amongst the party people. There was a Spanish relief which functioned for 2.5 years and raised £17,000. It's mentioned in there, and but apart from that, it was so far distant that it never really struck a deep chord in Australia.
Of course, then people who would want to go, like I wouldn't have much money or anything to go there, would they? I mean, you'd have to find.
The point about the Australians is that a lot of them were in the same category as Ted Dickinson, already living in Britain, or Lloyd Edmonds, who was over there studying, Ron Hurd, who was a seaman, Dick Whately, who was a seaman, and 4 or 5 others who were seamen. A lot of them got there individually without any guidance from any movement whatsoever in Australia. Just they hated fascism and they want to fight it.
Were many of them communist? Most of them?
I'd say about a third of them were communist.
One sort of gets the impression that it was only the communists, but the communists were the most vocal in recruiting people, weren't they?
Yeah, there was a communist organisation that done the recruiting in London.
I see. Yeah. Well, is there anything else that comes to mind that you think's worthy of recording on the Civil War, on the Spanish War?
I mentioned the piece about Bill Young, Whately. You'll see. No, you won't see it in that. It's only just briefly, but there's a book mentions Pyle. Really. Vincent Bromley, the nephew of Churchill, and there's a party what he has to say about Dick Whately, Australian.
Now, where's Dick Whately come from?
Dick Whately came from Australia.
Oh, was he Sydney or Melbourne?
I'm not sure. I think, I don't know whether it ever mentions, even in this book, where he came from, but he was a seaman, and they knocked about all over the world, particularly in Mexico and Latin-speaking countries.
This is, over the next few days, Romilly, this is nephew, Winston Churchill's nephew, got to know several of the English, among them a colourful character called Aussie, an Australian by birth Aussie. Now, who was this Aussie?
That was Dick Whately.
Dick Whately. This is Aussie, is it spoken of in the book. Page 57, by the way. Aussie had wandered over half the world, and now at 30 looked at least 40. Before he came to France and Spain, his wandering to take him to Mexico. And there, where the peasant's creed insisted that food must be given to any casual stranger who knocked on the door, he had picked up a reasonable living, but he had no friends. He could not find work, and at last he signed on as one of the crew of a cargo boat bound for Le Havre, where they told him there were as many jobs vacant as women. It did not work out that way. His complete lack of French proved his undoing. The French had no time for a man who could not communicate volubly and easily. And when he knocked on French peasant doors, they received him less warmly than the Mexicans. By every kind of cunning and subterfuge he managed to reach Paris. Anyway, then lying at one night on a harsh bench beside the Seine, feeling at his very lowest ebb, he thought suddenly of the war in Spain, which had penetrated even his limited awareness of the outer world. He saw it in sharp terms of a clash between the exploited worker and the privileged capitalist. The idea took hold of him he should go to Spain and do something for the people of Spain who were fighting for his and their precarious rights. Catholic Welfare Society, fully aware that he wanted to go and fight for the people in Spain, provided him with 10 francs and a ticket to Marseille. Marseille he met Jerry Fontana and Harry Adley. Fontana was an American who had worked as a longshoreman, but having no politics except to take care of himself, decided to volunteer because there might be something in this Spanish idea. That's an interesting point. There are many people in Spain, you think, who are merely there for the adventure, who weren't political?
In that period, in the first few months, there were adventurers amongst them. Northern adventurers.
And did many Westerners go and fight for Franco?
Italians and Germans, of course.
Yeah, but I just meant people like odd people like yourself.
Well, Joe Carter related that, and it was never verified really, that when we crossed the Ebro, we took a terrific lot of prisoners, and Joe maintained that one of the prisoners amongst them was an Australian. But we never ever found out who he was or anything about him, only that's just a statement of Joe. And the party never recorded it, as a matter of fact. I remember Joe raising it at interview, and the comrade saying, well, we've got no proof that he was an Australian, only just what he said to you.
I see. Now look, what about prisoners? What happened? Was the Spanish Spanish loyalists in the position to keep prisoners? And
oh yes, yeah.
They abided by the international.
That's later on. Earlier in the early part there was, and that at the savagery on both sides when they took prisoners. But as it developed, it was a code. For instance, now I at the time, 23rd of September 1938, we went into the attack early at dawn in the morning. We knew that they were going to attack, and we decided to cushion the attack. So we went into an advanced position, a machine company that I was a member of, and we occupied that from dawn until midday. And then we seen their tanks advance, and we knew where we were goners if we remained where we were. And it was part of our plan to go about 300 yards in advance, and then if we were forced back to retreat to another hill 300 yards behind and take up our real position. And on the way in that 300 yards I was hit in the leg, and I was a cot case, and I was laying out there and bullets going all around me, and I crawled down. There was terraced grapevines in a terrace. I got down behind the first terrace about 18 inches, and I was quite safe. Well, the battalion was withdrawn forever at midnight that night. The next morning they held a parade and my name was called out, and of course I wasn't there to answer, so they assumed I was missing, feared killed, and
Were you conscious all that night?
yes, I was quite conscious, yeah.
And you weren't bleeding too
I
badly?
was bleeding from the leg, but not nasty at all. And late on, about after dark, I seen the stretcher bearers coming out, and there was one Canadian and two Spanish on the stretcher that picked me up and took me back to the quarters. Well,
Were you still under fire? Was it still... Had the firing stopped by this time?
no, it was still going on. And the battalion was still in, the company was still in on this hill. But at midnight they were withdrawn. And the next day the roll call revealed me missing, feared killed. And the party at JB Miles got a telegram from the cable from Pollitt saying McNeill of Sydney missing, feared killed. And about 10 days later he got an email letter verifying that this is a point I want to make, they'd had word from the Fascists and I didn't appear on the prisoner list, so they not only not presumed that I was dead, they listed me as dead. And Pollitt wrote a great write-up of our final attack, and resistance and so on and so forth. And it wasn't until 2 months after that I got a Workers' Weekly that I seen I was missing, feared killed.
And you'd actually gone back to your own unit, had you? They'd taken you to a hospital?
Taken to the hospital.
Oh, I see.
I never rejoined the unit until 2 months after, when it was quartered at the battalion, at the headquarters rather, where I was in hospital.
Oh,
I joined them there. Called RIPOL, R-I-P-O-W.
Yeah, I suppose would there have been a shortage of medical equipment and this sort of thing?
There was. I got hit in the eye on one occasion, a shrapnel burst.
When was that?
That was early in the piece, about April.
And that was on what battle was that? What were you doing then?
It was Belshidi. And just in there, there's a piece there, still there, a piece of just a grain about as big as a BP shot. Well, I was sent to hospital and spent 3 weeks in hospital, and they still left the bloody thing there. They didn't know how to get it out. We'd never had the stuff to get it out.
Yeah, like the sort of things like disinfectants and this sort of thing, which was short, was it?
Yeah.
What was happening? Was this because of the blockade of the Western world?
Blockade, yes. Yeah. Yes, from after the first few months to the blockade, there was the non-intervention, and it was illegal to render assistance of any sort.
This was by the who was it?
League of Nations.
And was Franco getting supplies?
Yeah, he getting German and Italian as much as
I see. They weren't in the League of Nations, so they weren't taking any notice.
Take no notice whatsoever. With the Germans, there was what was known as the Condor Legion, C-O-N-D-O-R, and that the bloke was in charge of the Air Force, and then they had their artillery, infantry, and every avenue, every spear of fighting men.
Yeah, well, really, and yet, really, you reckon had you managed to carry the Ebro there, you would have defeated them.
If we hadn't been stopped after that, coming to the 20 miles, Hill 481, we would have.
Tell me, the international brigades, were they run just like any other army, or was there more worker, sort of rank and file participation in leadership and this sort of thing? How were they?
A lot of the leadership, a British battalion, for instance, the first commander of the British battalion was Tom Woodringham, a noted writer and authority on warfare, and an air pilot in the First World War.
What was he like as a commander? Was he a good
Real
statistician?
commander, but he never lasted long before he was wounded. He was promoted to not battalion commander, but onto the sort of presidium of the whole divisions of the
sort of general staff sort of thing.
general staff.
Yeah.
Well, then during 1937, 8 and 38, Sam Wilde, he was a sailor, and he took part in the Invergordon mutiny of the British Navy. Remember, over pay about 1934, I think it was. Well, he became the commander, and then another one. A colleague was here. There was 3 or 4 sailors that become commanders in turn.
Yeah, well, just that some of the people who write on the Civil War say that one of the reasons for defeat, or one of the big things, was the fact that the international brigades, were allowed to themselves, and that they more or less were told what to do by their home, communist parties and this sort of thing. That there was not a, they weren't a really unified group. Was this obvious to you?
No, that wasn't. I mean, I reckon and I say it in that little booklet.
Yeah.
The one thing that the international brigades was teach the Spanish unified action. There were anarchists and all sorts. Now, for instance, some of the anarchists in Madrid, they were given the order to entrench themselves. The anarchists said, we come to fight for Spain, not to dig for bloody Spain. They were, and
this was even so with the Spanish people, yes.
Even with the artillery and the gunfire and all the rest of it, they wouldn't lower their dignity to entrench themselves and get out of the fire.
Yeah.